Well, good morning. Happy Sabbath. Good to see all of you here. And today we are continuing on in our year-long series focusing on grace. We've learned a lot. We've looked at a lot of different things, different aspects, components, stories. We recently finished a lengthy series on the covenant and how the covenants really are undergirded by this framework of God's grace. Today we're starting a new two-part series called Seventh Day Grace. And today is a special day because today is Bob Miller's birthday. Our intrepid AV leader. We got to celebrate a little bit yesterday he also helps out with the community feeding, and we had a birthday cake for him as well as Tim, Angela's husband, and so it's nice to celebrate birthdays. And Bob, you're so close to being born in the right month, November. Just a few more days. November was always one of my favorite months growing up because that was my birthday month. And just a few days later was Thanksgiving, and so it was nice to get some days off. I told everyone they were taking school off for my birthday. But it's fun to celebrate birthdays. How many of you like to celebrate your birthday? Right? Oh, come on. Look, 3 hands. I know you might not like getting older, but it's fun to celebrate, isn't it? It's fun to spend time with your family, to spend time with your friends, maybe do something special that's out of your ordinary schedule, whether it's a nicer meal or a fun event. And it's fun to get together, and it's fun to celebrate and reflect on this year of life that you've been able to experience, and hopefully look forward to a full year of life that God has granted to us. What would it be like, though, to celebrate your birthday every week? Yeah, right? Now, some of us are like, oh, that's too much, all that birthday cake, I'm barely fitting into my pants as it is, that's, eating birthday cake once a week, that's too much. But if you, forget about the balloons and the gifts and all of that, if you were able to celebrate just with that day of reflection, that day of enjoyment, that special day, wouldn't that be nice? In fact, we kind of see that this is how God has set up the world. We're going to look back at the very first birthday as we begin. Genesis. The clicker's not working. I don't know if we can reset something, but Genesis 1, verse 26. It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all of the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground.'" Here God comes to the very end of the creation, the 6-day creation week, and he comes and he creates humanity. This was the end. After he's created all of the birds, all of the animals, the land, the vegetation, then he creates Adam and Eve. And they were the crown jewel of this creation experience. They were the cherry on top of the preceding 6 days of creation. Adam and Eve were the pinnacle, at least to this point, of the creation story. And God created them after everything else had been done, and he put them in charge. So let me ask you, was it possible for Adam and Eve to have taken any part in this act of creation? Any of you say yes? Or any of you say no? All right. Yeah, of course, it was not possible for them to be involved in creation because everything had already been created before they came into existence. I mean, even if they had the ability to create something out of nothing as God did, they weren't around to participate. It would kind of be like me asking any of you, were you responsible for building this Model T? Right? Any of you? Did any of you build this car up there? No, of course you didn't. First of all, I don't think any of you have the ability to create a car out of natural resources or the raw materials. I know we have some mechanics here that maybe you've been able to restore a car or put together some pieces and get a nice car going. But I don't think anyone here has the skills to take raw metal and shape it and turn it into engines and the rest of the car components. Much less the fact that I don't think any of us, well, I know none of us were here, were even a twinkle in our parents' eye when the Model T was produced. So there's no way that we could have been involved in the production of this car. And so Adam and Eve, they were created not because they had been involved in creation, and not because they had earned the right to be created. I mean, there is no way for any of us to earn something before our existence, right? You have to be at least a living, breathing entity in order to earn something. And yet Adam and Eve were created without the ability to participate in creation, and they were created without the capacity to have earned their creation. God formed Adam and Eve and gave them life simply as an act of grace. See, this is what we've been talking about for this year, grace, and hopefully by now we've come to the understanding that there is nothing that we can do to earn grace. There is nothing that we can do to deserve being given grace. Because grace, by its own definition, is something that is only available to us through the gift of someone else. And so, because there was nothing that Adam and Eve did to deserve to be created, there was nothing they did to earn their life, they were brought into existence simply out of the graciousness, the gracious gift of God. But the creation week doesn't quite end there. It goes on, and we read in Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 to 3. It says, "By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all of the work of creating that he had done." Now, it is interesting, this word rest that we see in this passage. We've talked about it before, but the Hebrew word menucha is not rest in that the kind of rest that we kind of think. It is a rest kind of like, say you spent a good long day in the kitchen. I know some of you might not be good cooks or whatever. You step in the kitchen just to pull out a protein bar or something. But say you are a great chef, and then Thanksgiving's coming up. So say you slaved all day in the kitchen, making every single component of the Thanksgiving meal. And so it's time to eat the meal. People have gathered around the table, and you see the mashed potatoes and the baked yams and the stuffing and the turkey or the tofurkey or whatever the case may be, the cranberry sauce, and you've made it all. And you take a moment, and you smell the aromas. And you take a moment and you pull out your phone and you take a picture for Instagram. And then you sit down and you dig in and you enjoy this meal. That's menucha. That is the rest that is being talked about in this verse. There's a sense of joyous fulfillment. There's this sense of enjoyment and tranquility. This is what is talking about here when God rests. He has put everything in order and he has made everything perfectly. And so he takes a step back and he just soaks it all in. But he doesn't create the Sabbath for himself. No, he actually creates it for Adam and Eve. Because he doesn't need to rest. He doesn't need anything really from this world, but he has created it for Adam and Eve to enjoy. And so he tells them, he says, Adam and Eve, I have just created you. I have just created this whole world, this whole system, this whole setup is for you. And it's for you to enjoy. And I know that there's things out there for you to work at, for you to occupy your time, but that can wait for tomorrow. Today, I want you to rest. Today, I want you to rest with me, spend time with me, enjoying this thing that I have made for you. I want you to spend time just having this moment of enjoyment and fulfillment here in my presence as we enjoy this newly created world, as you enjoy your newly created existence together with me. This is what God did. This was what God created, and He did it all out of grace. And He tells us, and He gave Adam and Eve, and He gives you and me this seventh-day Sabbath to enjoy the fact that we have been created, that we have been a recipient of grace from the very beginning. And this is the first truth this morning, that the Sabbath reminds us that creation was an act of grace. In a sense, every week we get to celebrate a birthday, the world's birthday. Every week God has invited us to take part in this Sabbath day rest, to be in His presence, to enjoy the world that He has created, to enjoy the works that we have accomplished the previous 6 days, to enjoy the family and the friends, the loved ones in our lives, to simply be in this sense of fulfillment, tranquility, and enjoyment of the grace that God has poured out upon you and me and the entire world. The Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath, reminds us that creation was an act of grace. But things didn't keep going at that perfect level, the way that God had intended and created them to function. Eventually sin came into the picture and just messed the whole thing up. And so God had to give His people laws to help limit the damage that sin was causing in their lives. And so He gave His children, His followers, the Israelites, the 10 Commandments. And the fourth of the 10 Commandments, He specifically and explicitly talks about the importance and the significance of this seventh-day Sabbath. We read about this fourth commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11, and it says, remember to keep the Sabbath holy. Work and get everything done during 6 days each week. But the seventh day is a day of rest to honor the Lord your God. Again, pulls in this theme of rest, this theme that connects this commandment to the very first Sabbath of creation. On that day, no one may do any work, not you, your son or daughter, your male or female slaves, your animals, or the foreigners living in your cities. God's saying this Sabbath was intended for all of humanity at the beginning. The Sabbath was not just intended for you as Israelites, but it's intended for everybody, even your animals. The Sabbath is a worldwide blessing. And here God goes on to specifically and explicitly connect it. In case we've missed out on that theme of rest that connects it to the Sabbath, He says this, the reason is that in 6 days the Lord made everything, the sky, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. On the seventh day He rested. So the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. He says, I blessed the Sabbath day and I made it holy. And holy means to set it apart. He said, I've made the seventh day unique. It is unlike the other 6 days. It is special. It is holy because on the other 6 days I created by my actions. On the seventh day I created by my inaction. The very definition of the seventh day is unique. It is totally separate and special than the other 6 days. I have made this day holy. And God wants us to remember. That's why the first word of this commandment is remember. He wants us to remember that He made the whole world. He made Adam and Eve, and He made you and me. And in this world that is so intent on telling us that we need to work harder, that we need to work faster, that we need to work better, that we need to earn our keep. God is telling us to remember the fact that we didn't even earn our existence. He's telling us that we need to remember to rest in Him. And this reminder, though, of the seventh-day Sabbath, it's not just a reminder of physical creation. It's not just a physical reminder. It's a spiritual reminder as well. Martin Luther, the famous Reformation theologian, he wrote, "The spiritual rest, which God particularly intends in this commandment, is that we not only cease from our labor and trade, but much more, that we let God alone work in us, and that we do nothing of our own with all our powers." He's saying that it's not just a physical rest that we're called to take on the Sabbath. He said it's a spiritual rest. There's something that God is doing within us that we need to recognize and that we need to enjoy and participate in just by resting. There's nothing for us to do. We are called not to participate in a physical work, and we're not called to participate in the internal work that God is doing in our hearts. And God makes this explicitly clear when He speaks through the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel. In chapter 20, verse 11 to 12, God says, "I gave them laws for living, showed them how to live well and obediently before me. I also gave them my weekly holy rest days, my Sabbaths, a kind of signpost erected between me and them to show them that I, God, am in the business of making them holy." God is saying, I have made the seventh-day Sabbath holy. I have separated. I have made it special. I have made it unique. But that's not the only thing that I am making special, that I am making holy on that day. You as my followers, you as my children, you as my friends, that enter into this Sabbath rest that I have created for you, when you do that, you are also being made holy. God says, I am using this day to make you special, to make you different, to make you unique from the ways of this world that tell you that you have to work as hard as you can, 24/7, to get by, just to get up in this world. God says, no, that's not the right way. That's not the way you were created. That's not the way that this world was made to work. He says, I am making you holy when you enter into this Sabbath rest. The Sabbath has been separated from the other 6 days. And I want you to separate your heart and your life from the rest of this world, at least for this 24-hour period. God is saying, I am using the Sabbath to remind you that I am working on your heart. That God is in the process of giving us a new heart, creating within us this new experience, this new heart, this new life. He's in the process of working out an eternal life for you and for me. And He wants us to remember that just as we had no way to earn our first lives, we have no way to earn this eternal life either. And this is the second truth, that the Sabbath reminds us that salvation is an act of grace. Just as the Sabbath reminds us that our original existence, that Adam and Eve's existence, that your and my mere fact that we're alive on this earth, that our creation is an act of grace, so is our spiritual work, so is that salvation that God is working out. That is an act of grace as well. And we are called to remember that on this seventh-day Sabbath. But not just that. When Jesus came, through His life and His teachings, He also tried to get us to understand the true meaning and the depth and the importance of this seventh-day Sabbath, this day of grace. We see throughout His life various interactions, and one of the things that He did was heal people and help people and restore people, particularly on the Sabbath day. And we read about one of these experiences in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus went into the synagogue on Sabbath. That was His custom. That's what He went to do. He went to worship on the seventh-day Sabbath, as we have come to do today. And He goes into this synagogue, and there was this man with a withered hand. And there was other religious leaders. And they knew that Jesus had this reputation for healing. And so they saw him come into the synagogue, and they saw this man with a withered hand there. And they told Jesus, Jesus, we don't think you can heal people on the Sabbath. They said, we've made 1,500 laws to protect the Sabbath, to make sure no one breaks the Sabbath. And we're pretty sure that one of those laws, if not a couple hundred of those laws, will be broken if you heal this man on the Sabbath. And this is what Jesus responds in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12, starting with verse 11. Jesus says, if any of you has a sheep and it falls into a ditch on the Sabbath day, you will help it out of the ditch. Surely a human being is more important than a sheep. So it is lawful to do good things on the Sabbath day. And he doesn't stop there. Jesus said to the man with the crippled hand, hold out your hand. The man held out his hand, and it became well again, like the other hand. Notice Jesus didn't stop and say, hey buddy, are you doing okay? When's the last time you sinned? Have you broken the Sabbath lately? Have you, broken any of the commandments lately? Oh, you haven't? Okay, well, let me fix you up then. No. Jesus saw this man that was in need, and he healed him because it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And this brings us to our third truth this morning, that the Sabbath reminds us that recreation is an act of grace. God, in the form of Jesus, recreated this man's hand there on the Sabbath to restore him to health, to help put back in order the way things should have been from creation. We are called to do our best to recreate, to help others recreate in this world. And I don't think any of us have the power to go up to someone that has a withered hand or other physical infirmity and heal them miraculously. But we do have the ability to come alongside people who are broken because of something that's happened this week, who have issues who are lonely, who are afraid, to come and to give them comfort, to come and to share our friendship with them. And maybe we're not doctors or nurses, and we can't prescribe medication, but if they are sick, maybe we can come and bring them some soup. Maybe we can come and drive them to the doctor, drive them to the hospital. We can come and we can help others be recreated on the Sabbath. Because this is the day that reminds us that recreation is an act of grace. In this world that just tries to overload us, we're constantly told messages from one source to another that we need to add one more thing onto our calendar, onto our schedule. We need to add one more task on our to-do list. We need to add one more burden onto our backs. It is in this kind of world, in this environment, it is so easy to lose sight of God's grace. And that is why I believe now more than ever, we are in desperate need of this weekly reminder of grace. We need to remember that God is not a God of burdens, but a God of rest. In fact, this is what he says himself in Exodus 33, verse 14. God says, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. God says, my presence is rest. I am the source of rest. If you are struggling this week, if you are struggling in life, God says, come to me. Come rest in my presence. Because this is who I am. I am a God that gives rest. Dr. Lynn Babb, she's a Christian pastor and professor. She sums it up this way. She says, the Sabbath helps us know experientially that nothing we do will make God love us more, because we are called to rest. And when we are called to rest, it means we put away our work, so there's nothing that we can do to work to earn God's favor. And we're called to rest in the power of God that is working in our hearts. And so there's nothing we can do to make God love us more because of our spiritual positions. We are simply called to rest in the fact, in the assurance of the knowledge that God has given us grace upon grace upon grace, and that there is nothing that we can do to get Him to love us any more than He already does. And so simply put, the Sabbath reminds us of grace. It's a seventh, every 7 days we get this 24-hour period to remember the fact that God gives us all of the grace that we could ever need in our lives. And in this world where busyness and brokenness abound, we all need grace. And isn't it amazing that we serve a God that pours out upon our lives all of the grace that you and I could ever need? So today I challenge you to not get overwhelmed by the things of this world once you step outside of these church doors. I encourage you to not give in to that nagging voice in the back of your head that says, oh, I need to get home and work and finish that work project or that school project. I challenge you to not give in to that feeling of pressure to deal with that mountain of laundry at home. I challenge you to not succumb to the temptation to feel that you have to perform a certain way, to do something or not do something, to earn more of God's love. Instead, I invite you to accept God's invitation to simply rest in His presence all day long. I know I want to accept that invitation, and I hope all of you do as well.